Hamitake api, chante washe na pe chius apie, dayan wachia kapi, ga dayan yahipi. Mishaila Bowman and make apie, damakota, kawamashichu. Sisseton Wahpeton oyate hemataha, wana tioshpae hemataha. Inawa ki Stephanie wana echia, ga kunshiwa ki Jenny Cranby wana echia, ga unkana wa ki Lawrence Larry wana ga Benedict wana ewichakiapi. Ampedu kinde čaŋpa iwo hadakapi kde chanina yamakpie. Wanietu yamani he eha wakanti pia wankapi edhtawani. Ga wana megizi edhtawani. Koshka ga wikoshke hechapi wan unspe wichawake. Taka wakanti pia wankapi nina washte wadake. Hello, my relatives. I shake your hand with a good heart. Welcome. It's so good to see all of you. I see some familiar names in our participant list here. My name is Mishaila Bowman. I'm going to be the MC for tonight's program. I was born and raised in South Minneapolis. I come from the Wana Tioshpae out in Sisseton. About 3 years ago, I used to work for Wakantipi, a Wayankapi. Right now, I work with a bunch of high schoolers at another Native-led organization called Migezi. But Wakantipi Wayankapi has a really special place in my heart because it does amazing programming like this. If you're new or this is your first Gifts of the Plant Nation series that you're tuning into, Wakantipi Wayankapi is a Dakota-led environmental nonprofit here in the east side of St. Paul. And they do really amazing work in protecting some local Dakota sacred sites and championing, oh my gosh, anyways, a lot of wonderful urban conservation and restoration of these Dakota sacred sites, as well as cultural connections like this event and environmental education and environmental justice. Overall, they're such a wonderful organization, and I really look forward to these events specifically. They were started a few years ago in hopes to each season pick one plant relative or one plant nation to bring in elders and cultural knowledge keepers to talk about these plant relatives and their stories and their histories and their names in Dakota and their uses and their gifts. And then we bring in Wakantipi Wayankapi staff to talk about their ecological role, because each one of our plant relatives has a place in this world just like us, and to share some really cool recipes that you can use with these plant relatives. I'm really excited for tonight's program because we have Unkana Rick Two Dogs here from the Oglala Lakota Nation, who will be presenting on the history of chokecherries, and then Jenna Grey Eagle, who's our Wakantipi Wayankapi's Environmental Justice and Stewardship Programs Manager, and then Gabby Menomin, who's who's Wakantipi Wayankapi's Restoration Manager. But before we get into our program, a few reminders. I just want to say Wopida Tonka to the U.S. Forest Service for partnering with us on this Gifts of the Plant Nation webinar series. As we go through the program, we're going to have each one of our presenters kind of hit on different areas of education and storytelling around chokecherries. And while we do that, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat in Zoom, or you can put them on the chat in Facebook Live if you're streaming in from Facebook. Normally for these events, we do have ASL interpretation, but unfortunately, our friends couldn't join us here today. But we have enabled the live captioning option on Zoom if you need. And we will be posting a recording of this event on our YouTube page, or on Wakantipi Wayankapi's YouTube page. But I think, one more other thing, speaking of Wakantipi Wayankapi, just like all of the amazing work that I said that they've done with protecting and restoring Dakota sacred sites, one really amazing project that Wakantipi Wayankapi is working on is a project that they're calling Daylighting Phelan Creek. So bringing back a waterway that was piped and put underground a long time ago, they're working towards daylighting it and making sure that we have that running water again. They're having the last community engagement session for the daylighting of Phelan Creek on September 12th from 5 to 7 p.m. And this is the last chance that neighbors in the area, so if you're in St. Paul, I really recommend that you try to head over to this event. That community members will have to shape what this daylighted waterway will look like. So yeah, I just wanted to shout that out real quick. But without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, Lala Rick Two Dogs, who comes from the Oglala Lakota Nation and will be talking about the cultural knowledge of chokecherries.
Okay, good evening, everybody. As Trojan said, which is niece in our language, Trakoja will be my granddaughter. I want to say good evening to everybody, and going to talk about what I learned from my relatives. I had a grandmother named Mary Afraid of Hawk, who, as a girl of 16 years old, survived the Wounded Knee Massacre. And a lot of the knowledge of plants and the fruits in our country comes from what she's one of the sources that I learned from. And then my grandfather, which was not her husband, but was a grandfather from my father's side. His name was Thomas American Horse, and I apologize for turning my camera off because I have an unstable the internet isn't the best here on the reservation, so we when I run my camera, I'm gonna get sometimes what I'm saying is gonna become garbled, so but I'll leave it on. So anyway, but he said I could turn it off like if I want to. So anyway, so I got a lot of knowledge of herbs and the different stories from them. So in with cherries, choke cherries, we call it čaŋpa. So čaŋpa is you seen on your screen. But when you break the word down, cha is wood and pa is bitter. And that comes from also the concept of the sand cherries, aonyerapi, they say. Aonyerapi, they're big, great big cherries, and they grow also in this area, in this part of the country. And the interesting thing about it is when you go to harvest the aonyerapi, the sand cherries, if you go the direction of the wind, the cherries become bitter. So if you go upwind, so say the wind is blowing from the south, so you'll have to approach from the north and come towards the cherries. If you approach from the south, then the cherries will be bitter, and they're different from the other choke cherries like along the creeks. The sand cherries are a lot bigger, and so that is called aonyerapi, and aonyerapi is a word that when you break it down, it means that it's affected by something. Uh, so sometimes it's negative and sometimes it's positive. So that's our word for sand cherries, and then choke cherries is čaŋpa. So one of the things I learned is, and some of you in your research probably learned that inside the choke cherries, the seed is arsenic. The choke cherry seeds have arsenic. So in smashing them, and I remember my sisters, my mother, my grandmother, and other elderly ladies, aunties, as we say in our language, grandmothers, would all come together, and after they harvested the choke cherries, they would spread large canvases on the ground, and they would sit and they would use a larger stone and a smaller stone, and they would, in our language, we call it gashki. Gashki is they used a smaller stone. They would hold it in their hand. They would put maybe 4 or 5 cherries on top of the stone, and they will smash it. After they get enough smashed, it would be running off the side of the stone, and they would get it and form it into patties, like you would see a hamburger patty. That's what they kind of look like. So they would put them on nylon, like almost look like window screens. And my father made a, a frame with this type of material on it. So they would put it in under the first layer and then cover it with these nylon screens so that the flies couldn't get on them. And they would dry them. And this weather now today would have been a perfect. In fact, the past few days, the past weeks or so would have been perfect time to make chokecherry patties. So this is how they preserved them. And so when they smash the seeds, it takes a lot of what would call the toxicity out of it, or the what is called arsenic is poison, as we well know. But in small amounts, it's not poison. So they would smash the chokecherry seeds and then form them into patties and then dry them. So they kept them this way, and then they were saved till the winter time. And then the chokecherry patties would be made into what we call wojapi. It's kind of like some of you may have tasted it, and they would sweeten it a little bit with sugar, and sometimes now they use a natural. They use the like Splenda and like that. They don't use the sugar because a lot of our people are diabetic now. So they would sweeten it and make what they call wojapi, which is like a pudding, and it's really tasty. Even people that are not of our culture or of our race have tried it, and they thoroughly enjoyed it. So that's one way that they preserved it, by drying it and then using it later on. So we use the chokecherries, and there's a type of chokecherries that they get it together, they smash it and then dry it, and then later on they make into something called wasna, which is pemmican. In the outside world they call it pemmican, but we call it wasna. And in there, they used kidney fat, dried meat, and they would mix it with the chokecherry that was smashed together. So smashed up into patties. And so they would make what they call wasna. So these to us are sacred foods. And they would also boil the chokecherry patties, and they make čaŋpa humpi. They call it čaŋpa humpi, and it's chokecherry juice. So these two foods, the chokecherry juice and the wasna, was made into. It's a sacred food that we use. So on the warriors returning from Vision Quest, this is the first food that we shared with them. So they would eat the wasna first and then drink the chokecherry juice. And it's the same thing coming out of the sun dance, because these men and women danced in the sun without any water for 4 days and nights. So they would be given this food to kind of break their fast. And it's a spiritual food. It's the food that we offer to our relatives that are dwelling in the spirit world, our relatives that have gone on. So we offer that to them. And we also used the wasna. There's 4 types of wasna that we use when we in the Sundance. So we offer it in the hole where the Sundance tree is going to go into. So we feed the spirit of the tree, because it's going to make a 4-day journey to the spirit world and take our prayers to the spirit world, where all the spirits dwell in the spirits of our loved ones that went on before us. So this wasna and the cherry juice is always also used in the Hunkan ceremony. So the Hunkan ceremony is one of the seven sacred rites, along with Vision Quest, Sweat Lodge, and Sundance. It's used in all of the seven rites actually, but uh, so when we have the Hunkan ceremony, the making of relatives, then they use the choke cherry juice and wasna. And so, say for an example, I would take somebody, maybe a young woman or a young man or even a child, and as my relative, they will become my maybe grandchildren or maybe nephew or niece, or I could take somebody my age as a brother or a female my age as a sister, and we make relatives. And it comes from the word ohunkanke, which means ancestors, because when we make relatives with this person here on earth, our ancestors in the spirit world and the ones that went before us and our ancestors that are coming before us that are not yet born were all made relatives. So hunkan comes from the word ohunkanke. And so that food is used in that ceremony. So usually if I took, like, say, a young man, then I would feed him the wasna, and I would give him the choke cherry juice. And that's a symbol of nurturing him with through the rest of his life as my new relative. So I will nurture him in any way I can, whether it's for food or for comfort. And if he needs my help someday, maybe he went through some type of catastrophe, a loss of a loved one or something, then I would be there to comfort him and nurture him. So that's what these two foods represent. And also, there's a word that's an old word in our language. It's called wagluch tatapi. So wagluch tatapi is a food offering to the spirit people, whether it be wasna, cherry juice, or it could be maybe a piece of buffalo meat, anything that we offer as a food, we call it wagluch tatapi. So we're feeding the spirits of our ancestors. So a lot of us, like my wife, keeps a wooden bowl on the table and she washes it from time to time and wipes it out with sage or sweetgrass. And then we that's where we put our food offerings. So we both lost our parents, and I lost all my siblings. She lost one of her siblings. But beyond that, our grandparents on both sides of our families, we feed them also. But not only them, but also the spirits that come to help us in the healing ceremonies and in the sweat lodge ceremonies and in the Sundance, we feed them with this sacred food. So these foods are very important, and it's also used as a medicine. So whenever you partake of the wasna or the choke cherries, and they're smashed up, and you chew them and you eat them, the arsenic in the choke cherries, it's enough to go through our bodies. It's not enough to hurt us or kill us, but it's enough to go through our bodies and take out any type of impurities in our body, whether from whatever, the foods that we eat now, especially the food with all the preservatives. It's not really good for our bodies. But these choke cherries can take those impurities out of our body. And then those of you that have studied like cancer, there's something called free radicals in your body that go about. It kind of like bounces around inside your body, and if it connects to a cell and starts to grow, then that's how cancer starts. But this choke cherry has the ability to counteract that, so that it doesn't. It keeps these free radicals from um, attaching itself on a cell, some type of a cell in your body, whether it's in your lungs or in your brain, your stomach, wherever. Uh, so these are important foods in our culture because we not only eat them for nourishment, for pleasure, but we also eat these plants and these fruits as medicine. And so also chokecherry bark is really good when you scrape it off of the stick and dry it and chop it up into pieces, and you can boil it and you get a tea made from it. And it's really good for illnesses of your abdomen. It's good for uh, ulcers or gastritis or any type of inflammation in your stomach. It helps it. And it's really good. It's really a good for like somebody that's suffering from chronic diarrhea. It will coat their stomach and it'll help them to overcome that sickness because it's a dangerous sickness and it can dehydrate you. You know, so that's important there. And then we use the cherry sticks also for when we go on a vision quest. So we cut saplings and we tie our offerings on these saplings to one color for each direction, to the sky and to the earth. And that's where we tie our offerings. And the reason that I was taught through by my grandfather to use cherry is because we want the good things in life for ourselves, our families, and our people. So the choke cherries represent the good things in life. So we want an abundance of that, like food and whatever helps us to survive and to be happy. This is what we want. And I know different medicine men have different teachings. Some I know use small cedar saplings. Some use cottonwood, and it all comes from a man's vision and a man's teachings. So we can't get into this thing about uh, while they're doing it wrong over there and my way is right, like that. We have to, as my grandfather used to say, we have to respect each other's visions and say, well, I use chokecherry, but you're using cottonwood saplings over there, so they're doing it all wrong. We can't do that. There's a reason why maybe they do that over there. So you respect that man's vision, or if they use cedar saplings or whatever they use, uh, red willow bark saplings, whatever is used, then that's them and that's their teachings, and it's not for me to say they're doing it the wrong way. My way is the right way. That's we shouldn't get into that as people. So those are the important things that our ancestors use, and there's a story behind why we use these things. Uh, there's some men that use plums, kanta, for medicine. Uh, there's some people that use mastipute, which is buffalo berries. Uh, so different things like that. They were used for medicines. They had medicinal qualities in them. One of them is a willow bark has quinine in it, the same ingredient that's in aspirin. So people used to boil willow bark and drink it for headaches or pain in their joints because it's also an analgesic, which takes away swelling. Like that's the symptom of arthritis is the swelling of the joints. So it's an analgesic and it relieves that. So uh, so that's a medicine also the willow. So these are examples of medicines and how we use them, and even different foods were medicines. When somebody had a bullet wound, those warriors a long time ago, they said not to eat anything with thorns in it because it will aggravate the wound and cause it to hurt more, and it would even cause the wound to fester. So when somebody had a bullet wound or a wound from an arrow, they didn't eat like like plums because they come off. Anything that has a bush with thorns on it are they didn't eat buffalo berries, anything like that, and they would only eat lean meats. They wouldn't eat meat with a lot of fat on it till their wounds closed and they were well on the way to healing. So I'll talk that much there, and then I'll give my granddaughters or whoever's gonna talk next chance to talk. So thank you. Wopila echichap dona anagopta nakapi mitakepi. Ohechetula.
Pidamaya Lala. That was so lovely. I always love hearing the stories that we get in this first part of the webinar. I think it really helps to set the tone.
Oh.
And next, we're going to be hearing from Jenna Grey Eagle, who is Oglala Lakota and comes as our Environmental Justice and Stewardship Programs Manager. And she's going to be talking about the nutritional and medicinal benefits of čaŋpa or chokecherries.
Yeah, thank you, Mishaila. Hamadakiapi, Nape Matoya Makiapi. Yeah, Wopila Tanka, Lala Rick, that's really beautiful. All your teachings, I always really adore everything you have to say. And yeah, hello everyone, my name is Jenna Grey Eagle, and I'm the Environmental Justice and Stewardship Programs Manager at Wakantipia Waiagapi. My family is Oglala Lakota, and we come from the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And yeah, I'm so excited to talk about chokecherries a bit more as a food and nutritional source, because unfortunately it has the reputation of being poisonous or bad for you. Like many of the plants that we cover on Gifts of the Plant Nation, as Mishaila was talking about, we work to reverse these narratives that people have painted that, you know, our native plants are bad or they're poisonous for you. Indigenous people have utilized chokecherries for thousands of years as a source of food. And I'm excited to talk about how they are actually edible and really good for you as well. If you can go to the next slide, please. So the table on the left-hand side on this slide shows all the nutrients that are available within about 1 cup of chokecherries. So as you can see, eating about 1 cup of chokecherries will provide you with vitamin A, C, and K, as well as the minerals calcium, magnesium, potassium, and phosphorus. And dietary fiber is especially noted in here because even 1 cup, it contains anywhere between 17 grams all the way up to 30 grams of fiber a day. And considering that humans only need about 30 grams of fiber a day, and the fact that you can receive almost all of your daily fiber from 1 cup of chokecherries alone is really incredible. So as far as internal medicinal benefits, so chokecherries contain disease-fighting antioxidants, flavonoids, anthocyanins, and proanthocyanins. And basically what each of these mean is that they possess a high capacity value at fighting against allergies, viruses, and even cancer-causing elements as well. I think more and more research is being done about how chokecherries have really, really good cancer fighting abilities, as Grandpa Rick was talking about as well. And the chokecherries also contain a high dose of quinic acid, which is known to prevent urinary tract infections. So overall, just really, really good for you. As far as internal medicinal benefits, it's also said that, you know, quinic acid has a really strong connection to circulation, or stronger circulation, stronger blood vessels. You know, it helps you fight against heart disease, high blood pressure, and even diabetes as well. And it's also said that chokecherries support the digestive, integumentary, and respiratory systems. So digestive, I think we all know, means you know, things like your esophagus, your gallbladder, your intestines, your liver, your mouth, your pancreas, your salivary glands, and your stomach. Integumentary means it really supports your hair, nails, and skin. And then respiratory includes the bronchi, the diaphragm, lungs, mouth, nose, and throat. So chokecherries are good for all these systems that I just said, the digestive, respiratory, and integumentary. And then it also has antispasmodic, astringent, and expectorant properties as well. So antispasmodic means that it helps to relieve, prevent, or lower the incidence of muscle spasms. Astringent means that it can cause the contraction of skin cells and other body tissues. So it can, what that really means is that it helps shrink pores and it helps cleanse your skin, especially if you have more oily skin. And then expectorant means that it's kind of like a type of cough medicine, so it can even help you clear up mucus from your airway, and it helps to relieve congestion. And then lastly, as far as external benefits, you can use the crushed leaves and really thin strips of the bark can be used as an insecticide, which basically means it helps keep bugs away. If you go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to give a really simple wasna recipe. As Grandpa Rick was talking about, wasna is the name that the Oceti Shakoi uses for pemmican. And I want to start with talking about, the poison aspect of chokecherries, because a lot of people think that you can't utilize the entirety of the chokecherry, but you actually can. As I said, indigenous people utilize the entire fruit for thousands of years. And wasna is a really good way that you can actually use the entirety of the plant. So by drying it or by cooking chokecherries, you kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? You basically get rid of the effects of the poison by either drying or cooking the entirety of the plant. And so recently we had our very first ever hike and harvest event that we hosted, where we highlighted chokecherries and a way to utilize the entirety of the chokecherry. So these pictures on the slide are from that event. And I just want to say, you want to start with, or I just want to say in this picture, you can see some of the process of how to actually make the wasna. And so first you start with about 2 cups of shredded beef or bison jerky. So you can actually dry the meat yourself using a drying rack. You can see on the bottom right picture, that's the drying rack that we use once you cut the meat thin enough. And you can use the drying rack, you can use an oven, or you can use a dehydrator to dry your meat. Or you can just buy dried jerky meat. And if you do use the drying rack, it takes about 3 days in the sun for it to fully dry. And as Grandpa Rick was talking about, using a bug net is probably preferable, just so you don't have flies flying on your meat. And you basically want to wait until the meat is the same consistency as beef jerky and it crumbles easily. And then you take about one cup of the chokecherries, or you can really use any berries. You can dry cherries, or you can dry cranberries. And if you're going to use fresh cherries, you can either smash them with the rock on a cutting board, like on the picture in the bottom left, or you can use a grinder, or you can use a mortar and pestle, really whatever works for you. And then you're going to want a fat. You're going to want about 6 tablespoons of any sort of fat that you want. You can use buffalo or beef tallow. You can use vegetable shortening. Some people use duck fat. So it's really any fat that you want, what you prefer. And you can also use cornmeal to make corn wasna, but you want to lightly toast the cornmeal in a cast iron skillet if you're going to use it. If you go to the next slide, please. So basically you take your dried jerky, which is now going to be called bapa in the Dakota language, and then you take dried berries and then you blend them together in the food processor. You can also use a blender, or you can do it by hand as well, but you just want to make sure the dried berries and the dried meat mix really well together. And then you incorporate whichever fat you chose to stir it into the dried berries and dried meat, and you form a patty. And once you have the patties, you can dry them either using a baking sheet in the sun, the dehydrator, or you can put them in the oven. Some people even use their car. You can use the DoorDash of your car. And then once you have the patties dried up, you can store them in an airtight container. So people used to utilize wasna as a superfood as well as cultural uses, especially for the winter time. So it can store for quite a while. But if you choose not to dehydrate it and you just want to refrigerate it, you're going to want to eat it within 3 days. And then if you can go to the next slide, please. And then next we have čaŋpa wojapi recipe directions. So this is a really simple recipe. It's really delicious. I think the easiest way to translate wojapi is berry pudding. I don't really call it a pudding though. It's not really a jelly though either. It's kind of hard to translate. But it's kind of like a sauce that a lot of people use on either fry bread or they put it with salads. So it's something that a lot of people call wojapi in general, because you can use any mixture of berries, but you're going to want about 6 cups of fresh chokecherries. You can also use blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, elderberries, cranberries, blackberries, or you can do a mix of it. And then you're going to want to put that in with about 1.5 cups of water. And then you put those in a saucepan over really low heat, and then you want to bring it to a simmer and cook it. And then you want to stir it occasionally until the mixture is thick. Some folks like to add cornstarch as well in order to kind of speed up the process a little bit. Or you can, I've also heard some people use timsla or timsina flour as well, which is like a prairie turnip. And once that's dried, you can actually smash that and use that as a thickener. And then you can add either, regular sugar, honey, or maple syrup as desired. Or you also don't really have to add a sweetener at all either, because most berries are already pretty sweet. Yeah, and that's it for me. Piramaya for listening, and I'm gonna hand it back to Mishaila.
Piramaya for sharing those. My second favorite thing, just kidding. This whole webinar series, I just love them so much. But I love that after each one we can take away or go with some really good recipes. And thank you for all the work that you put into that, Jenna Grey. So yeah, to our next presenter, we have Gabby, who's our restoration manager from the Potawatomi Nation, coming to talk about the ecological role and kinships with Chokecherries.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Gabby Menomin. I come from the Forest County Potawatomi community up in northern Wisconsin. And I'm really excited today to talk to you guys about the ecological roles and the kinship roles that chokecherries have. I grew up eating chokecherries with my cousins. We used to, each summer, we would clean off one tree at a particular lake, and we would always get really bad stomach aches because we would eat so much. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys more and talk about the ecology. So if we want to go to the next slide. So just some background information about chokecherry. So the scientific name is Prunus virginiana. Some common names that it goes by. There's a long list of common names, but here are the ones that I hear the most here in the Midwest. So we have, I've heard people call it bitterberry, chokecherry, of course, Virginia bird cherry, and Western chokecherry as well. Once you get out west, closer to like California, they have some really unique names for chokecherry. But chokecherry is part of the Rosaceae family, otherwise known as the rose family. So some other prunus or cherry relatives that grow here in Minnesota are wild plum, pin cherries, sand cherries, and black cherry. Other relatives that are related to cherries are things like our native roses, service berries, chokeberries, which I like to call them more aronia because people get confused between chokecherry and chokeberry. They can kind of call them the same thing, but when you talk about chokeberry, chokeberry, that is an aronia species. And it's also, chokecherries are also related to hawthorns and raspberries as well. The habitats that they prefer to grow in, so they're really adaptable. They're a really adaptable species, and they can tolerate a lot of different environmental conditions. They do prefer pretty close to full sun, but they can tolerate shade, and they can tolerate partial shade. They can tolerate a number of different soil conditions, from alkaline soils to kind of wet, sandy, wet soils near riverbanks and near streams and things like that. But they can also tolerate pretty dry soils as well. You can kind of find them along prairie edges as well. They grow pretty well in oak savannas. They grow pretty well in prairie habitats. Generally speaking, you'll find them more in mesic prairie habitat types here in Minnesota, but out west in South Dakota, you can find them growing in the drier prairie conditions as well. But then here in Minnesota, really common to find them in those oak savanna conditions with that partial shade. You'll find them in openings and some of our hardwood forests as well. They really like to be around forest edges, other openings, roads and trails, and of course along the riverbanks as well. So they can grow really anywhere. They're very, very tolerant as well. They make really great boulevard trees as well. And so this map over here on the right side kind of shows the distribution of chokecherries throughout North America here. So you'll find them all the way over on the East Coast, going super far into Canada, and you'll find them even all the way out west over by California as well. So this is a really, really cool and unique species. Let's see, I think if we want to go to the next slide then. So I just want to kind of walk you guys through some identification for chokecherries, because I'm going to be honest, it took me a really long time to learn how to identify chokecherries, and I still get it mixed up sometimes with some of our native cherry species and some other lookalikes that I'll talk about when I'm done talking about identification. But we'll start with the flowers here. So this kind of flower shape that you see right here, the kind of like technical term is called cylindrical racemes. So they're just kind of like these tubular cylindrical flower bunches here, and they'll be white with little white centers in them. And then the leaves, the leaf arrangement is going to be alternate. So, you know, opposite, we have leaves that are right across from each other. Alternate, they're kind of staggering up almost like steps on a twig. And so the leaf shape, it's a little more oval or rounded, but it's going to come to a pretty sharp, short point at the end of the leaf. If you look at the outside or the margins of the leaf, they're going to be very finely serrated, very sharp teeth, quote unquote, you might call it. They're going to look kind of like sharp on the outsides of the leaf. And then let's see, they're going to be pretty dark green on top with a kind of lighter green, almost silvery on the bottom. They're going to have a slight glossy look to them, but they don't get as glossy as some of the other cherry species. And then let's see, another great key identification for chokecherry and just cherries in general, you'll find that the prunus species, they're going to have these two little glands right at the base of the leaf right here. And those glands can be different colors depending on the time of the year. When the leaf is a little bit newer, they're going to be a little harder to spot. They're going to be kind of like a pretty pale green, but then they'll kind of sometimes develop this red color, and especially towards the end of the season, they'll get pretty dark, almost black in color. Typically, you can see it's typical to see two glands, although you can get some leaves that don't have any glands. So if you're looking at a chokecherry and you're not sure if you're looking at chokecherry, you want to look at multiple different leaves to look for those glands. And some leaves can actually have up to 5 glands on them as well. So I really like to point this out because I remember learning in my dendrology class in college, this was like a really key thing to find when you're identifying different plants. So the form will look in the center image over here at the bottom. So the form, it's going to be in the wild, you're more than likely going to find them to be a little more shrub-like. They're going to have a pretty short trunk, and they sucker pretty easily, and they form these kind of like dense thickets a lot of times. In an urban setting where you have more like cultivars, you might see them have more of a kind of typical tree form where they're a little bit taller, a single trunk that's pretty thin and can get pretty tall. But in the wild, especially here around Minnesota, you're going to see them a little bit more in the shrub form. And I will say with chokecherries, they rarely grow above 30 feet tall. I think their average is around 20 feet tall. That's about how the average height that they can grow to. And the berries that we'll see in the center top photo up here, The berries are going to be growing in these rounded drupes. That's the kind of technical term. So they go from those, cylindrical flowers to these drupes. And the berries are going to be very shiny. They're going to have, early on when they're starting to grow, they're going to be a pretty bright red color, and they'll slowly start changing into like a deeper red, almost maroon. And then when they're fully ripe, they'll be pretty close to black, if not, a really, really deep, dark red. And that is the best time to pick the chokecherries. I remember in college trying to, when we were being introduced to plant ID, I had a professor tell people, oh, you can try the berries, but they're not going to be any good. And he had people try red berries, and I'm like, guys, they taste so much better when they're ripe. So yeah, you want to look for those blackberries as well. And so let's see, and those seeds in the chokecherry berries, they contain hydrogen cyanides as well. Just a note to make. And then the bark. So we'll see the bark here at the bottom right image. So the bark on chokecherry is going to lean towards more being on like they're going to be a little more gray than some of the other cherry species. They can get a little bit red-brown, but you'll typically see them with a little bit grayer bark. And you can see in that photo there's these like white bumps on it. So those are called lenticels. They're kind of a mechanism that some tree species have. It's kind of just like a way that the tree can breathe, essentially. So the lenticels on the chokecherry are going to be horizontal. Some other species, you'll see lenticels as like just these round little dots all over, but you'll see them more kind of like streaky or horizontal on the chokecherry. And I just want to talk a little bit about horticultural varieties. So you'll see these a lot more in like the urban landscape. And a lot of the horticultural varieties that I tend to see, at least, they're going to have, there's a lot of them that have darker leaves, almost these like red or purple type leaves. They were just bred to have that certain color, but that is really common to see chokecherries in an urban area with different colored leaves. Let's see. All right, if we want to go to the next slide. I'll talk about lookalikes, specifically how chokecherry can often be mistaken with buckthorn. So this is an issue that we have come across with some of, working with some contractors and partners at Wakan Tipi, is that, we'll ask people to help us with buckthorn removal on our site because we do have quite a lot of buckthorn growing at Wakan Tipi. And sometimes we'll go out there and we'll notice that some of our chokecherries are missing. Because it can be very, very hard to differentiate chokecherries from a couple of different species. And buckthorn is one that is very, very similar to it. I want to point out first the image on the right side. Those are two different leaves right here. So on the kind of bottom part, that is the cherry leaf, the chokecherry leaf, and the kind of one that's overlapping a little bit, that is a buckthorn leaf. And it takes a really long time to be able to differentiate them in the field like that. So I don't fully blame people for accidentally cutting down a chokecherry when they're doing buckthorn removal, but there are ways to be able to tell them apart. So if you were to look at the leaves very, very closely, and I wish I had a closer up image of it, but you'll see that the chokecherry has those very like sharp, pointy, tooth serrated edges, whereas the buckthorn, it's a little more duller teeth on it as well. And then the buckthorn as well doesn't come to as like distinct of a point at the end of the leaf as well. Buckthorn leaves are a little bit more rounded as well. You'll also see on the chokecherry that the leaf stems as well are a little bit, they have a red tint to them, whereas the buckthorn is going to stay pretty green on the leaf stems. Another great way to tell them apart is when you're looking at their bark, especially when you're looking at glossy buckthorn versus chokecherry, is the lenticels. So on the chokecherry that you can see on the right image there, looking at the bark, it's kind of that more like streaky lined horizontal lenticels, whereas on the glossy buckthorn, it's going to be a little more like stipulated, kind of rounded points on there. Flowers are also different. Chokecherry is going to have the white flowers. Buckthorn is going to have these like really really discreet little green, almost yellowish flowers. And then when you're looking at the berries, and this is really, really important because you do not want to eat buckthorn berries. They will cause severe indigestion and you will get very, very sick from it. And they also don't taste good as well. So those chokecherry berries are going to grow in those droops there. So they're going to kind of grow in like a line down like that, almost kind of like how grapes grow. They'll have a droop formation. Whereas the buckthorn berries, they'll grow closer to the actual twig and stem itself, and they're less bunched than chokecherries as well. So those, I just want to point out those key differentiations because if you're foraging, you want to be careful not to harvest buckthorn berries. But some other lookalikes that you don't have to worry about as much, and it's a little bit harder to differentiate between some of our native species. So chokecherry can look like a lot of our other different native cherry species, of course, as well as chokeberry, which is that aronia, and then juneberries as well. I'm still learning how to, especially early in the spring when things are starting to are kind of newer to the landscape and waking up and stuff, it's a little bit harder, but some tricks that I've learned to differentiate chokecherry from some of the other native cherry species. So when looking at pin cherry, the pin cherry leaves are going to be, they're going to be, oh no, sorry, not the leaves, sorry. The black cherry leaves are going to be thinner and kind of more slender. The black cherry tree itself is also going to be a much taller tree. They can reach up to 60 feet in height, I believe, and the bark on the mature trees of a black cherry is going to be kind of curling or peeling with a little bit of cinnamon tone to it as well. And the black cherry is going to have more rounded teeth around the edge of the leaf as well. When looking at chokecherry versus pin cherry, the pin cherry is going to have it's going to be mainly kind of a red-brown bark. It's not going to be as gray as the chokecherry bark. And the fruit and flower structures of pin cherry are more of an umbrella cluster kind of shape, and less of that like cylindrical or droop formation. So I just want to point that out because it can be really hard to tell chokecherries apart from a couple different species. Oh, I'm sorry, I should have pointed this out in the identification part. One thing that I had learned in my plant identification journey is that, and this is something I always struggle with, but I like to bring it up for other people that maybe have a better sense of smell than myself, because I honestly can't smell too much, unfortunately. But I've heard the smell of the inner bark of chokecherry. If you were to scrape off some of the bark, it has a really astringent or kind of bitter smell, and almost that kind of bitter almondy cyanide type smell to it. So if you have a better nose than I do, this is also a great way to identify chokecherry and some of our other native cherry species as well. They're gonna have that bitter smell to them. All right, we want to go to the next slide. So now I'll talk about some kinship roles that chokecherry has with wildlife. So the biggest kinship role that chokecherry has is being able to provide food through its fruit. Birds absolutely love chokecherries. Some common birds you'll find here in Minnesota that really love to eat chokecherries are robins, cedar waxwings, which is that bird in the upper right-hand corner. Orioles, which is that orange bird down at the bottom. Grouses, which is that little brown bird on the upper left side. As well as a lot of our different jay species, woodpeckers, thrushes, bluebirds, and grosbeaks as well. Those are species in Minnesota that you'll often find picking off chokecherries as well. But then other animals that love the berries as well include animals like bears. Coyotes have been known to eat chokecherry berries as well, and then small mammals and rabbits and hares will also eat the berries. In terms of browse, moose, elk, deer, and some small mammals will browse on the twigs, the leaves, and the bark of chokecherry. And then chokecherries are also really great for cover and nesting places for birds and small mammals when they grow closer to like water bodies and streams and riverbanks. Waterfowl will also use them for nesting, and they're also a great thermal cover for fish as well. They can help keep fish cool during the summer. Let's see. We want to, oh, and then the flowers as well. Pollinators, our native bees really do love the chokecherry berries as well. So early in the spring when they're flowering, you'll often see a lot of insects and other pollinators around the chokecherry flowers. All right, if we want to go to the next slide. So some ecological kinship roles that chokecherry plays with its like broader environment that it lives in. So these are really great trees, especially when you kind of plant them in like denser plantings or really close to each other. They can be really good shelter belts and windbreaks as well. You'll see that in that bottom photo here. And then they're also really great for erosion control, especially along stream banks as well. And so this photo here on the right side, it kind of shows how they what they can kind of look like growing near a water body. And this is also a great example of like how that thermal cover looks for the fish there. So it'll provide some nice shade in that water body for some fish as well. And then we'll go to the next slide. So some threats to chokecherries. This first one isn't too much of a threat. So this is something called black knot fungus. Another name that another term that I've heard for this is poop on a stick. So this is a pretty common fungus for a lot of our native cherry and prunus species. And so this is another great identification if you're not sure if you're looking at a cherry species or another species. Is a lot of the cherry species will have this black knot fungus, and this is generally a pretty it's not very detrimental to chokecherries or other cherry species unless they have a really bad infestation. So if you see it growing on your cherry, I mean, it may look ugly, but it's really not causing any harm to it. But some other threats to chokecherry. So this is one that I've heard from a couple different community members that have kind of noticed this become a little more of an issue, is something called plum pocket disease. And there's the Latin name underneath it there as well. So this is a fungus that infects stone fruits like plums and cherries. And so this fungus causes the fruit to become distorted and hollow and also enlarged in a lot of cases. It can also cause the leaves to curl up and wither as well. So some symptoms, I'll kind of go through the stages of the symptoms. So it'll start off with a small white blister on the fruit often, and that blister quickly grows to cover the entire fruit. And so the infected fruit can grow up to 10 times its normal size and have almost like a spongy texture to it as well. And then the fruit eventually becomes covered with this velvety gray fungal spores, which then those spores are able to spread to other chokecherry or other plum or other cherry species nearby as well. And eventually that fruit's going to dry out and turn black. And so the best way to kind of manage against plum pocket disease is to cut off infected fruit, and you want to burn it as well. You don't just want to leave it laying on the ground because those spores can still get into the tree and reinfect next year, or even infect neighboring trees as well. And so this is one that, like I mentioned, a couple community members that I've talked to have kind of noticed an increase in. Generally speaking, plum pocket disease doesn't infect chokecherries as much as it does like our native plum species. But a lot of people are noticing that our chokecherries are becoming more and more infected with this. So this is something to keep an eye out for, especially in an urban area and in our natural landscapes as well. And another threat to chokecherries is tent caterpillars. And so chokecherries are actually a primary host species for tent caterpillars. And so this kind of just, they are a native species, but kind of where it becomes an issue is when they're kind of overtaking a chokecherry and they do a lot of defoliation and kind of like choking it out as well. And then let's see, we also have overbrowsing. This is more of a concern for the shrubbier chokecherries or young chokecherries. A lot of times, especially deer or some other small mammals can overbrowse and can cause a younger chokecherry to die because of that. And then another threat to chokecherry is just kind of the stigma and misidentification key. So, you know, the stigma of it being poisonous, which in large quantities for livestock such as cows, horses, and sheep, it can be deadly if eaten in large quantities in a short period of time. But then also that kind of misidentification piece where, you know, especially if you're in an area doing buckthorn removal, which chokecherry and buckthorn like to grow in very similar locations, you know, they can be taken out of an ecosystem just by misidentification as well. And then also kind of part with the stigma is that they're considered, sometimes they can be considered a weedy or aggressive native. And this is due to its ability to resprout from root suckers as well. They have rhizomatous roots that run that pretty easily resprout if there's disturbance to the main plant as well. So this one is also considered more so in an urban landscape as a weedy or aggressive native as well. Okay, I think that is all for me. I don't know, do we want to go to the next slide? Oh my gosh, sorry guys. Growing your own chokecherries. So it is actually very easy to grow chokecherries. You can propagate them from seeds, which I have a picture shown over here on the right side. You can propagate them from the seeds as well as cuttings. So if you were to go up to a chokecherry and take a secondary branch and cut it at a 45-degree angle, you can put that in some water and wait for the root system to start growing from that cutting, and then you can put it in the soil, keep watering it until it starts getting established. But they're really, really easy to grow from seed as well. The one thing to remember if you're going to harvest your own chokecherries and try to grow your own chokecherries from the seeds is you want to get all of the pulp off of the seed. This is really, really key in the germination. And so other key aspects to being able to get your seeds to germinate. So you want to have some sort of scarification process to kind of speed up the germination process. And so typically in the wild, this is the scarification process is done from birds or other animals that ingest it, and throughout the process of moving through the digestive system, the kind of outside of the seed gets kind of withered away or broken in certain areas. And then by the time it exits that animal, it's able to germinate a lot faster because of that scarification process. But they also do need a cool, moist stratification. And so this is something that is done like throughout our winters, where we have, you know, warm days in the winter where the snow kind of starts to thaw a little bit. And then you move into colder days where that kind of moisture refreezes. So that kind of cycle that's natural in our winters around here, that freeze-thaw cycle throughout the winter is another great way to get that scarification process for chokecherries as well. All right, and now I think I'm finally done.
Piramaya, Gabby, for sharing so much. I always love your part of the webinar too, because I feel like I learned so much about birds and pollinators and the ecological role of a lot of our plant relatives. I remember visiting with the elder once, and she told me to make sure that I pay attention if I'm running into plant medicines over and over again, because it's probably something that my body and spirit needs. And when you were showing that map of all the chokecherries and how they grow in so many different environments, it made me wonder how many of us really need that medicine. And maybe that's why they grow everywhere. But but all around, I love chokecherries. And I'm really happy that we were able to gather tonight and talk about them. So I just want to say Pidamaye again to all of our presenters. Right now, we're going to go through a few of our questions that were written in the chat. Now's your time if you have any burning questions to put them in the chat quick, because we'll go for about 10, 15 minutes through some of these questions. Secretly, I have a question. I have a purple chokecherry tree growing at my auntie's house, and I always wondered if they're in the same family. Can I harvest them? Do they have the same medicinal like properties? And I was wondering if any of you had ever heard of the purple chokecherry.
Yeah, I can talk on that. So that purple chokecherry is more than likely a horticultural variety. So one that was, bred in a nursery to specifically have those colored leaves. Kind of what I've heard from a couple different elders in my community and some of the Ojibwe communities is that the horticultural varieties have less of them, their medicine isn't as strong as like the wild species, just because when the nurseries are breeding them, they're breeding them for like things like aesthetics rather than in the natural environment they're being bred to be like strong plants and have those strong medicinal properties. But you can still eat them. I have one that's growing up in by my house. The berries taste exactly the same. I will say with the horticultural varieties, they're a little more prone to that black knot fungus and are a little more susceptible to it becoming an issue where it might hurt the plant. And they also re-sprout from their roots a lot more. So you'll have to do a lot or aesthetically pleased, or to make it more aesthetically pleasing, you may have to do more trimming around the base to get those little suckers off.
Thank you. Kind of pivoting off of that, we have a question about let's see, chokecherry bushes at my friend's house in the Black Hills are dying. I think a good pruning will help. When is the best time to do that?
So generally speaking, you want to prune early in the season. You want to try to get it before it becomes too big of an issue. So the springtime, when you're first starting to notice some disease symptoms, is the best time to prune. But with chokecherry, they're pretty resilient, so you can prune them in the summer and into the fall as well. It's not like you don't want to, it's kind of a little less strict than like say pruning an oak where you want to do it like in the fall or the winter. Chokecherries, you can do it in the summer and the fall as well.
Would that be the same for if you were trying to get a cutting for propagation?
Yes. Yep.
For the black knot fungus, would it be beneficial to cut it off the branch so it doesn't spread?
I wouldn't say it's beneficial. Like I was kind of mentioning before, it's kind of got this like neutral symbiotic relationship where it just kind of chills on the chokecherry. It doesn't really affect it negatively. I will say if it's starting to become an issue where you're noticing less leaves growing on it, or the chokecherry is just kind of generally looking a little more wilted and sick, that would be a great time to prune it. But if you just have like a couple twigs or branches on it that have the black knot fungus, I personally would just leave it be. But if you're going for kind of that aesthetic look, pruning it off isn't going to do any harm to the chokecherry.
So overall, trying to treat the black knot fungus, you should just leave it?
Okay. I would say yeah.
Thank you. Can you still eat the unaffected fruit if a cherry tree has plum pocket diseased fruit that you removed? Yep.
So fruit that's not affected on the tree is perfectly edible and fine. Even if like one berry gets like a tiny little spore on it, the whole thing is going to become affected. So you don't have to worry about like, oh, half of the chokecherry is infected with the plum pocket, but the other half is fine. It's either going to be the whole berry infected or none of the berry infected. So yeah.
We have another question that said, my aunt said that eating the berries and spitting out the seeds would help the chokecherries grow. She said the saliva helps germinate the seeds. Is this true?
I would say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just thinking from like what the points I was making before, where you want to get as much of the pulp off as you can, chewing them and just getting the flesh around the berry, around the seed off. And I guess kind of it would make sense that the saliva would start to break down the outside as well. I wouldn't say the saliva is too significant, just because those the shell on the chokecherries is pretty thick.
This might be a question for Jenna and Lala Rick. Does the size of wasna patties affect how long they will last?
Maybe you can answer this better than me, Rick, but I think you want to go smaller. Like I would say like the palm of your hand is the general size. I wouldn't go much bigger than that. I think if you dry it and you store it properly though, it should last. I don't know. Some people, store it up to a year. Some people go about 6 months. I would say not any longer than a year. Yeah, that'd be my general advice, but I wouldn't go bigger than like the palm of your hand.
Yeah, I agree too.
A little bit of, okay, another question. Do you have a sense of how long the seeds will last in the soil bank? This one's for Gabby. Thinking in terms of repopulating areas that have been overrun by buckthorn once they are cleared of the buckthorn.
Yeah, so I think generally speaking, they can last up to 2 years in the soil. But if you get that scarification process, you can get them in, like if you were to plant seeds in the fall that were scarified, they would more than likely germinate in the spring. So, but generally speaking, about 2 years.
And then we have a question. Is there any way we can get the seeds? In Flanju, there are no longer any chokecherries here. Do we know of any place to get chokecherry seeds?
I mean, there's chokecherries in a lot of places here in Minnesota. You'll find them especially along like roadways and like on the edges of fields as well. I see them around the Twin Cities here growing in a lot more of like the sandier conditions. But maybe this would be a great time for your community to reach out to another community in the area that might have chokecherries and kind of like build that relationship, harvesting together, collecting those seeds together. You want to try it. Generally, the rule of thumb with like seed collection is you don't want to go more than 100 miles outside of where you plan to plant it. Like your seed source shouldn't be more than 100 miles away from where you're at. Generally speaking, just because habitat conditions that those seeds come from, the plants are used to. So you kind of want to keep it as close to your region as possible.
I wonder too if there wouldn't be any sort of native prairie plant company near you too, where you could get cuttings from, if not the seeds.
Yeah.
I know over here, what is that one called? Prairie Moon Nursery.
Yeah.
There's different places like that as well. Another comment, I was taught that the seed is also medicinal, so you can eat them, just not too much or your stomach would hurt. I think that's what Lala Rick was saying too. All right, I think that is it. Am I missing any other questions? No, and just as a reminder, unfortunately, our ASL interpreters couldn't join us this evening, but we will be posting a version of this webinar with closed captioning to our YouTube page in a little bit. And I just wanted to mention real quick too, if that we'll be putting a survey in the chat for everyone's feedback. That really helps us to decide what's going well with these, what we could do better, what everyone likes. And thank you again to the U.S. Forest Service for being our partner for this evening's event. And another round of Wahpeton Dakota to Jenna, Gabby, and Lala Rick. And I think with that, that concludes our event. So Pidama, thank you so much everyone for tuning in. And keep an eye out for the recording on our YouTube page, which will probably be announced on County Potawatomi social media pages as well. And remember to come to the daylighting of Phelan Creek Community Engagement Session in September. And you can go to Wakantipi Awayankapi and their website to learn more. All right, Daksha, okay.